Greetings, friends. How y'all doing today? Hope you're doing well. So this is a little bit of an off-the-cuff riff for you on some ideas I've been thinking about recently that I'd like to communicate. Doing my best to articulate a bit more deeply an understanding of what ego and non-dual states are and how this might practically apply to, say, your experience of anxiety. I believe in a recent video I said that I would commit to the next little while really working on the topic of anxiety. That hasn't changed, but I'm going to be approaching it from different angles, from some very deep perspectives, and offering you some insight into what it's like to simply not live in anxiety. So hopefully this will appeal to those of you that need that kind of support, while also kind of nourishing you at perhaps a more deep, substantial spiritual level. There's multiple ideas I want to communicate in this video, but I'll just start with this. There's a choice that we all make, that we are all constantly making over and over, that is at the foundation of all the other choices we make. And this choice is really, you could say, if you want to use these terms, the distinction between ego or personality or identity and non-duality, the egoless state, the subtle abiding in the eternal oneness of all life. And there's a choice that we make, that we learned to make when we were very young, when we were developing, and that is a choice to step into personhood, personalityhood, or to simply exist as pure beingness. Words for this kind of an understanding for non-dual states are always vague at best, and I'm going to do my best here to leverage all my skills and all my study with communication, with NLP, to serve you to try to elucidate this, but see if you can really grasp, maybe even just on an intuitive level, what I'm saying here. We have a choice between distinction, between building a narrative about who we are, becoming a person and a personality and an identity and a established brand, for lack of a better word, in the world. Or we have this ability to simply allow ourselves to abide and rest and exist in the pure awareness, the pure attention, the pure, full, expanded beingness that we naturally are in every moment. The reason I bring this up is that when we choose personhood, when we choose to move into the personality, what happens is that we naturally filter down that broad expanse of all the information that we have and all that we are and all our potentials, and we narrow that down to a much slimmer set of possibilities and narratives and memories and experience that we use to reference, to define ourselves and operate inside of. So they become this kind of narrowing of the aperture of your consciousness, or kind of a contraction of the scope of your being to something perhaps a little more focused, but also something that is rife with limitation, rife with assumptions, rife with suffering, rife with anxiety, fear, paranoia, struggle, worry, pain. I mean, pain happens either way because we're in a body. But I hope you get what I'm saying here, that there is inherent in that first choice a massive limitation. Now, what's interesting about this is that non-dual literally means not two, not separate. So when we don't make the choice to narrow ourselves down into personhood, but instead choose to remember or connect to or actualize that natural expansive ground of being that we are, and we allow that to be fully present, not only in our unconscious awareness, but our conscious awareness as well, what ends up happening instead is that not only are we experiencing ourselves as kind of this undifferentiated field of possibility, we experience ourselves as clarity, stillness, radiance, peace, kind of a smoothness to the energy, kind of a calmness, kind of a lucidity, a clarity. Not only do these kind of qualities naturally arise in us, which includes an absence of things like worry, an absence of things like obsession, fear, rejection, reactivity, but also it includes our awareness of all those aspects of ourselves as well. So when you're being your whole being, if you will, you are also inhabiting all these parts of your memory, parts of your identity, parts of your being that consist of pain, that consist of fear, that consist of worry. And you're able to inhabit them in a way where you're not caught up in them or bound by them, but you're still aware of them. And this is really what I want to talk about, because in that first choice, you have the choice to honor all of yourself and heal all of these psychological wounds while at the same time abiding in a state of groundedness, well-being, clarity, wholeness. Or you can step into personhood. You can play the society game, the hierarchy game, the identity game of building a sense of self. And as you build that sense of self, you also end up limiting yourself. You have to, by definition. And when you do that, you're naturally going to feel anxious. It's part of the package, right? So this is one way that we can use non-dual awareness to very practically remove anxiety from our lives, by learning how to sense and experience what is already naturally the ground floor of our being, by learning to allow that to come to the conscious mind, come to the surface of the awareness, because it's always there. I love my hair today, it's great. By allowing that to become present, become conscious, become the forefront of our attention. In that, we resolve so many of these issues, just quite naturally. And this really ties into a couple points I want to share and kind of more teach to you. And this is the distinction in psychology between what you can think of as content and context. There are at least 2 layers to our psychology, probably more. Probably it's infinite, and there's all kinds of nuances and subtle varieties. But for the sake of conversation here, sorry, I'm kind of doing a close-up on my face because I'm just holding the camera. For the sake of a conversation here, I will keep it to a very basic distinction, which is that there are at least 2 layers to our psychology. And what you find a lot of times in people who are, deeply invested in psychology, especially traditional psychology, what you get are people who are very much in the content of their history, of their lived experience, of their memories, of their traumas, of their pain, of their fears. And so that's one layer. One layer is content. The other layer is context. And so this is, I maybe you're already seeing, but if not, I'll continue to explain, and maybe you'll start to see a parallel between what I was just saying with this original choice between identification or being, and how this parallels context and content, right? So with the mind, we have content, and that would be literally the narratives, the stories, the experiences, the aspects of our personality, the ways we've identified, the things we hold on to, the things we're filtering out of our consciousness. All of this kind of, the stories, the narratives, the pain, the fear, all that. That's content. And then we have what would be context. That would be things like your neurology. How is your brain working? How is your nervous system working? How is that being fed by, say, diet, lifestyle, sleep? Things like the way you've contextualized the content. So is a memory, literally made as a picture in your head far away off in the distance, black and white, in which case you may experience that as kind of vague memory? Or is it contextualized as a picture that you keep flashing right up close to your face? It's, a movie perhaps, and in color, and, full vibrant sound that you keep looping on over and over, in which case it might be something you're obsessing on and dominates your internal experience. Either way, these are representations of mind. I did another video called The Representational System about the 3 different main avenues that we process information internally through. Put a link to that above. But we have these different ways that we can contextualize our experience, our memories. We have these different ways that we can frame. For example, a lot of times, the way we do a negative thought internally will be through a different sense modality than the way you do a positive thought. You might create positive thoughts inside your mind, let's say, with bright, colorful pictures. You might do negative thoughts, for example, with might do negative thoughts, for example, with self-talk, with internal dialogue, or with remembering something someone said to you, so something auditory. And so very often there are these very ingrained ways that the unconscious mind has learned how to generate different states via different channels of internal experience. Hope this is making sense. And so that's all context. In other words, because obviously any memory you have is going to be, assuming it was a live in-person experience, would have a visual component, an auditory component, a body kinesthetic component. Theoretically, we'd also have a olfactory. There'd be a scent memory. There'd be a gustatory memory. But generally speaking, we don't include all of that. We exclude a lot of that. In fact, if you think about it, out of all the memories you reference on a regular basis to define a sense of self, there are more memories that you exclude, that you could include, than the ones you're using, right? Anyways, I'm on a tangent here, but the point I'm making is that we have content and context with our psychology. Now, traditional psychology emphasizes content and largely ignores context. Hypnosis, NLP, things like this, a lot of neuroscience actually look at context much more than content. Now, what's interesting about content and context is that with content, you're looking at a sense of heaviness. Content feels heavy. It feels weighty. It feels powerful and potent, but it feels often like a struggle to move through, to address, to experience, to conjure up, to deal with. It's very dense. And whether that is heavy in the negative, so you're, working on negative memories, negative emotions, fears, that kind of a thing, or whether it's heavy in the sense of heavy solutions. So things like just the kind of long, slow, drawn out talk therapy type solutions, which largely use the conscious mind, the prefrontal cortex, to try and process what is essentially unconscious content. By contrast, context is often very light. It's very deceptively fluid, easy, comfortable. It's more meta. It's more looking at rather than being inside of. It is more about exploring the senses over exploring the stories. That makes sense. And what's interesting, and this is why, I was drawn to hypnosis and NLP as a way to serve people and help people change their experience, is that when you use context, you can shift content very quickly. This is why, one of NLP's claims to fame, for example, was that they could cure phobia in 10 minutes that would have taken 4 years of therapy to normally fix. That's kind of the difference between content and context. So in context, we're able to shift things around because we're not looking so much at the story, which is often where the person's attention is. We're looking at how they're processing the story. When you change the way you process the story, you change the story itself. Or you change the meaning of the story, which essentially recontextualizes, again, context, how that story lands for you, if it's important, if it defines you in some way. So, swooping back around to what I was first saying about the original choice, the first choice we all make. So, it's the same thing with just our being and thinking, if you will. Or there are probably other ways we could frame it, but let's just leave it at that for now, being and thinking. So, again, you can be and be in touch with your original self, which is one with all things, which is naturally light and radiant and free and whole and at peace and clear and present. All of this is immediately available to you as the natural currency, the natural fabric of your being. So that would be kind of a context, or you can move into content, again, personality, right? Which again feels what? Heavy, dense, frightening, contracted, stressful, overwhelming, like a struggle. And it really is. For most people, most people unconsciously buy into this original choice of personhood and then struggle their way through their lives, and then wonder why it is that they're struggling, why it is that they're anxious, why it is that they're suffering, why it is that they're in pain all the time, why it is that life feels so boring and unfulfilling and like such a slog. And we come up with all these rationalizations and reasons and justifications, and many of those are true and are correct. I'm not negating that necessarily, but they are fundamentally born out of an original fiction, which is the fiction of the self as a separate thing, a separate identity from the all that is. And when you return back to seeing yourself as the self, seeing yourself as life force, seeing yourself as all of this, right? When you return back to that awareness of being all of this, of being a part of all of this, very naturally, very effortlessly, there's nothing you can do to be a part of life. You already are. All you can do is simply remember that fact. And when you return to this kind of consciousness of being fully present as a part of life, fully unsubscribed from the personality game, from the personhood game, from the content game, you release this addiction to content, to ego. It's just immediately liberating. It's immediately freeing. And what you're left with instead is the spaciousness. I don't even like the word freedom, because it implies perhaps freedom from something or freedom to do something, when I think the more accurate word to describe the experience of the subtle awakening of the non-dual state is something more like spaciousness. So when you unsubscribe from personhood, what you're left with is spaciousness, just full presence, full, here I am, here it is, here all of this is, here being is happening right now through the current of my awareness. And that's a beautiful thing. So I wanted to just leave you with that for now. I will probably talk more about this, but I want to give you this distinction of the original choice of content and context, because it's, maybe not the easiest, but it's certainly the fastest way out of anxiety. So I hope that serves you. Hope you're doing well, and thank you for your time and your attention today. We'll talk to you soon.